So I'm disappointed that the EU is unprepared to have anything to say on the subject. I congratulate the Hungarians for having a government that actually takes it seriously, and I think Hungary is a model for a government that takes it seriously and is doing things about it, investing heavily in it, because it realizes that however much it costs to support families today, if you don't have families, if you don't have children, there will be no economy at all tomorrow.
Welcome everyone. You are listening to the new Carry the Fire podcast episode. My name is Georgina Kiss-Kozma. In today's episode, we are going to talk about demography. I'm delighted to have Paul Morland, the UK's leading demographer, author, and broadcaster who writes and speaks about population and the demographic trends across the world. He has written 4 books and his work has been translated into 9 languages. Thank you for accepting my invitation.
Thank you for inviting me.
Let's start with a simple but provocative question. Why is it important to talk about demographic issues? Why is it important to write a book about it? After all, children have been born before, and the chances are good that they will continue to have children. It's true that there are fewer today, but that also has advantages, for example, that we have more space, we don't burden the planet. Many people have already asked whether it is okay to have children in times of climate change.
So first of all, let me answer why we generally should be talking about demography and why it's an interesting and important topic. And then let me answer the specific question about why we need to talk about the need for more children. In other words, let me start with my first 3 books and then let me talk a little bit about the 4th one. Generally, I think demography is a hugely powerful tool for understanding world history and for understanding the contemporary world. And that's the basis of my writing before the current book. I think it's a tool for understanding history and the contemporary world that has been underutilized. I think if we understand, for example, the population explosion in the United Kingdom in the 19th century, the first country really to escape from what we call the Malthusian constraints, then we can understand the rise of the British Empire much better. Without that huge surplus population, Britain could not have populated California or Australia. I say California through the population explosion, much of which ended up in the United States. The United States was experiencing a similar population explosion. If we don't understand the rise of populations in Germany, we can't understand the predominance of Germany, particularly in the Franco-Prussian War. If we don't understand the paranoia of the French after the Franco-Prussian War, we can't understand European geopolitics leading to the First World War. I could go on and on. If we don't understand the rise and decline of the Japanese population, we don't understand the Japanese economy and its growth and then its relative decline. So my basic argument is that we need to understand these things to understand the past. And then today, if we look at the contemporary world, if we want to understand what's going on in Africa, if we want to understand the challenges the Chinese have with their economy, if we want to understand the sclerotic level of growth in the European community, none of these things is entirely demographic, but they all require an appreciation of demography and an understanding of the basic dynamics of demography, the rising and falling populations, the rising and falling fertility rates, changes in life expectancy, aging, and so on. Without these things, I don't think we can understand the past or the present. So that's a general justification for why demography matters. Now, let me address your second question specifically, which is around my 4th book, Tomorrow's People, Why the World Needs More Children. People think that it's fine if the population declines. The example I always give is Japan. Japan had 100 million people in the 1960s. Its population then went up. Its population is now going down, and it will reach 100 million sometime in the 2040s. Having gone up, it will then go down. The question then is, what's the problem? Japan was fine with 100 million people back in the 60s. It will be fine with 100 million people in the 2040s or 2050s. The problem is that when it was on the way up, it had 9 workers, people of working age, for every retiree. back in the 60s. When it's on the way down, it will have barely one worker for every retiree. It's not the absolute number of people, it's the structure of population. When you have, as Japan has had, half a century of sub-replacement fertility, too few children, and rising life expectancy, then the whole population will skew. We've never seen societies like this, and it's not just Japan. Japan is interesting because it's ahead of the rest of us. The whole of Europe, much of North America, and many other countries in the world, countries like Jamaica or Thailand, quite poor countries, are all heading for this very old society. Long life, many old people is a wonderful thing, but it can't be supported unless we have the children today who will be the workforce tomorrow. So that's one angle of why this really matters for the world. Japan is just an example. Then you have the issue that many people want children and are not having them. Lots of reasons for that. But if people say they want 2 to 3 and they're only having 1 to 2, there are many sad stories there of people who would like to have children and who have none, or who have 1 and who would like more. So it's important because it's actually a human aspiration to create the next generation. It's a human aspiration to have offspring. And people are somehow being blocked from doing that, whether it's economic or cultural or environmental. So I think it's worth looking at simply because people's aspirations and hopes are not being met. Specifically to answer your environmental question, there are a couple of responses to this. First of all, people say they won't have children because of the environment, and yet they consume the labour of others. They expect a bus driver when they want the bus, they expect a doctor in the hospital, a nurse, they expect the supermarket to function, the food to be grown and provided. So they consume the labour of others. If they're not producing that labour themselves, then they're actually not being consistent. If you don't want people because you think people are bad for the environment, then you have to take yourself off to a cave and lead a very simple life, not relying on other people. If you're going to live in a modern economy relying on the labour of other people and not producing it yourself, you're a bit like someone who says, I don't believe in agriculture, it's wrong, it's cruel, it's bad for the earth. Of course I'm going to eat, someone else can do the agriculture for me. So there is a whole range of reasons why it matters, why population matters, demography matters, and why we will not have a human future if we don't create that human future through having our own offspring.
According to the latest calculations by the United Nations, the world's population will continue to grow until the end of the century and will only peak in 2084. Why should we be worried?
Again, there are a whole level of answers to that. The first is that the UN, I respect the UN and it's very useful, but the UN tends to be lagging behind the forward in population, the forward in fertility rates. So they were saying if population would carry on growing until the end of the century, now they're saying the 2080s, who knows what the actual truth will be. But I suspect the UN is underestimating the fall in fertility and therefore globally, and therefore the date at which this global population will decline. Secondly, we build up the problem and we do nothing about it for decades, and then it will take a long time to turn it around. So Britain, we went below replacement fertility in 1972, I think, 73. Only now do we have more deaths than births. So now we have an organic natural decline in our population in Britain. It takes a long time to work through, but then when you try and reverse it, it will take decades. We'll have lots of old people in the category of the age of dying. We'll have too few young women having children. So even if they have a higher fertility rate, we'll still have population decline for decades. So we need to think about this and plan it well ahead. But the third thing, which I think is the most important, is that we don't live at the global level. We live in nations, we live in families, we live in communities, we live in societies, we live in nations. The nation state exists. That's the level at which people are taxed. It's the level at which welfare is provided. It's the level at which people tell their national story. And to say simply the global population won't start declining for decades is not an adequate answer to Koreans who say each cohort of Koreans is 1/3 of the size of the next. So in two cohorts, in 2 generations, you lose 85% of your population or more, And don't worry, Koreans, because the population's growing in Burundi or in Angola. It's no answer to people in Hungary to say, yes, you've got a declining population, but the population is still growing in Afghanistan. So globally, we don't yet have a problem. So the fact is that people live in nation states. They think of their existence within the context of the nation. And even if you're not a nationalist, but you simply believe in the welfare state, a state that taxes and redistributes, this happens at the level of the nation. And already, decades before the UN thinks we're going to have global population decline, we see population decline and demographic challenges in many nations. So I think it's the point for the nations to start considering this and start doing something about it, and not simply to say somewhere else on the planet, someone's having children, so I don't need to worry about it.
In your book, you describe the 3 stages of population decline. Please help us to understand what these stages are and what happens to the population in these stages, and how do you think it is possible to return from the second or third stages to the first? Is there a realistic chance that Japan, South Korea, Italy, or Germany, for example, can achieve this?
The point of talking about stages for people to realize that it takes a long time for this problem to build up and express itself in population decline, but long before it does that, the problem is in the works. So stage 1 is when couples have less than 2 children, and probably a little above 2 because of infant mortality rates, but very few people die before they've completed their fertility in developed countries and in many non-developed countries. So because we all survive now through our fertile years, or the vast majority of us do, a fertility rate of 2 is reasonable. Once you go below that, you're building in population decline, but it takes generations for that to happen. So stage 1 is you don't have enough babies per woman, but you're still having quite a lot of babies and not losing many people through death because you have a normal population pyramid because of past population growth and high fertility. So stage 1 is what we call sub-replacement fertility. Phase 2 is you have mass immigration to cover up your fundamental loss of population. Some countries go through phase 2, some countries don't. For various reasons, some countries don't want immigration. Immigrants are far more attracted, say, to the United Kingdom, where we speak English and we traditionally have a high standard of living, than they are, say, to China, where the standard of living is lower and the language isn't spoken and the culture not understood in high fertility countries in sub-Saharan Africa, say. So stage 2 is you cover this loss of population, where you are now at a point where you're having more deaths than births by mass immigration. So in Britain, we went into phase 1 in the early 70s. We're now in phase 2. We're now having more deaths than births, but we're having mass immigration to cover that up. Phase 3 is the ultimate phase where you move into population decline, either because the immigration is not high enough anymore or because you never had it. There are many countries, including Hungary, countries in Southeast Europe, countries like Germany, countries like China, countries like Japan, countries like Russia, really big, important countries, small countries, a huge number of countries where they now have more deaths than births. And many of those countries are not having mass immigration, like China, like Russia, like most of the countries in Southeast Europe, and they now have absolute population decline. That's phase 3, if you like. So what can you do to avoid it? Is it possible to avoid it? Well, the trouble is that many countries are not even trying. In Germany, for example, a strongly pronatal rhetoric or a strongly pronatal set of policies is somewhat taboo. In Britain, where we've had below replacement fertility for more than 50 years now, we never had the politicians talking about it. And now we have the Prime Minister mentioning it, and he's simply saying, I'm not going to tell people how many children to have. So we're going backwards. Where you can address it, where you can talk about it, where the politicians are bold and brave enough to discuss the subject and to introduce policies, that is phase 1, if you like. That's the first step. You can't get anywhere if your public debate, your public discourse, and your politicians are not prepared to entertain the issue that you're having too few children. And then we can have a long debate about what are the right policies, what are the right incentives. Is it about benefits for people with children? Is it about tax relief? Is it about helping them, as happens in Hungary, with housing or with childcare? So you have all these discussions about policy. Ultimately, to turn this around, you need a complete cultural revolution. You need a shift in the way that people think about their lives, about their education, about their childbearing. And we need to reorder lives so that people have real options to have their children and want to have their children at a sensible age when their biology is equipped to have those children. And at the same time, they can fully develop themselves through education, through careers. I think we need completely to rethink the way we do families, the way we do education, so that people, for example, can have their families younger and then train and get complete their education at a later stage if that's what they want to do. One of the problems is that we think there's a set order, set pattern to life. You go to school, then you go to university, then maybe you do a master's, then you start on the career ladder, and then eventually you think about having a family, and at that point it may be too late biologically. So I think all those things are important. We want full development. We want full participation in the labour force from all our people. But we need to think in a more flexible way about how we order it so that people can have their families at a time that their bodies are actually best equipped to do so.
In your book, you also write about the demographic trilemma. You write that once through the demographic transition, countries can have two but not three of the following: a low fertility rate, ethnic homogeneity, and economic dynamism. I wondered if there wasn't a fourth way. Technology is developing so fast that we can almost certain that we can use it to solve a number of problems. For example, we can solve not only the labor shortage, but also demographic challenges, just as there are programs designed to care for the elderly.
Well, let me talk a little bit about the demographic trilemma, and then I'll come on to talk about whether it can be sorted out by technological innovation. The idea of the trilemma is, think of a triangle, and there are three E's at each corner of the triangle. There's the E of what I'll call egotism, the selfish lifestyle, and I don't want to be too judgmental. The lifestyle that means you don't have children, you have a low fertility rate. The second E is economic dynamism, that the economy grows and government manages to control its debt. And the third E is ethnic continuity, the idea that some people, it matters that the people in their country in the future will be the descendants of the people who were there in the past. Some people find that offensive. Some people don't like it. But the fact is, to many people, it is important. To many people, it matters that their countries are ethnically continuous. There may be an element of immigration, but the bulk of the population is descended from the people who have been there historically. So my argument is you can have two of those things on the triangle. You can be on one side of the triangle, joining up two of the sides, but then you're going to miss out on the third corner. So the examples I give, I give three countries as examples. Japan says we are egotistical in the sense we don't want to have children, we don't want to have families, we don't want to be changing nappies in the middle of the night. We don't want mass immigration, we want ethnic continuity. So they're on that side of the triangle. What they miss out on, therefore, is economic dynamism. And since the Japanese population started to decline, actually since the working age population started to decline in the late 80s, Japan has hit a real lack of economic growth. Once it was a country that people were very economically optimistic about. So that's where Japan has ended up. Israel, by contrast, is the only country in the OECD with a good fertility rate. That's about 3 children per woman. Everywhere else has below 2. So they've said, we'll give up the egotism. We will be family-minded. We will have those children. We'll be on that line between ethnic continuity and economic dynamism. Because we have larger families, we don't need mass immigration. We don't need mass ethnic change. We can keep the population as it is, broadly, ethnically. Of course, they encourage Jewish immigration, but they don't require it. And as a result, we can have a dynamic economy as well. In the UK, we want the economy to be dynamic, but we don't want to have the children. We're like the Japanese in that we want to have a lifestyle that doesn't incorporate large families. And the result of that is that we've had mass immigration and very fast ethnic change. Now, I'm not telling people where on this triangle they should be, but I'm pointing out that there are trade-offs you need to make. And I speak to people in the UK who are anti-immigration, for example, and I say, if you want the economy to function, And if you don't want mass immigration, then you have to do something about the fertility rate. So that's the basic trade-off of the demographic trilemma, which I described in my last book, Tomorrow's People, and which then with the economist Philip Pilkington, we've actually quantified. So we've said, what does it mean in terms of numbers? If you don't want immigration in the UK, for example, and you don't change your fertility rate, how low is the support ratio of people in work, out of work going to go? And what will that mean for the economy? If you want to maintain the support ratio, that you won't have children, how big must the immigration be? And if you alternatively don't want immigration, but you want to keep the support ratio and the economy functioning, how high does your fertility rate have to go? So we've actually quantified that in a paper that's available online with an organization called ARC. So can technology square the circle, if you like, or square the triangle? With technology, can you get away from this problem? And the answer, I think, is no. People have been talking about technology replacing labor since the Luddites were smashing machines in England in the early 19th century. But of course, the machines didn't replace labor. The basic machines of the Industrial Revolution resulted in a huge demand for labor. We were told that there would be the rise of the robots 15, 20 years ago that was going to replace people. Now we're told that AI will replace people. I no doubt that AI is going to change the way we work. And I no doubt that AI will mean that there is some substitution of labor for technology in certain jobs. And that's exactly as it's always been. But I don't believe that AI is going to replace people altogether. And that's because, well, first of all, we can see it in the productivity data. As AI has come in the last few years, we have not yet seen a boost of productivity. Economically, productivity data says how much economics do we get out of a certain amount of labor. And the productivity data, if you were going to get this revolution, you'd find, well, we could then produce the same economy with half the people, or double the economy with the same people. That ratio is not changing. We're seeing very sluggish, very slow growth in the productivity data, which means that an ounce of economy, if you like, a gram of economy, still needs as much labor input as it did 5, 10, 15 years ago. Economic growth, and particularly productivity growth, is very slow in developed countries. And actually, the reason for that is, I think, if you look at so many of the jobs we do, from people who collect the bins to brain surgeons and many in between, technology is really only marginally affecting those jobs. Lots and lots of jobs require human input, require human brains, require human hands. And the idea that in the next 5 or 10 years, we're suddenly going to be able to substitute all this labor for technology, I think is as untrue now as it was when people were making the same claim 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
Recognizing this historical challenge, the Hungarian government chose a different way to tackle demographic problems after 2010, when it decided to build an innovative, comprehensive family support system and put families with children at the center of its future policy vision. The starting point for this family-oriented social policy is that a strong and competitive Europe can only be built on strong European nations, and this requires strong European families. As a result, family policy and the promotion of starting a family and having children has become very important in Hungary since 2010, and the Hungarian government has developed a rather complex family policy package which includes a number of concrete measures. To mention just a few, measures to support people who start a family and having children, such as the tax benefits for families and first-time married couples, measures to reconcile work and family life, such as a personal income tax exemption for mothers with 4 or more children, measures to promote home ownership for families, such as a home ownership grant, and measures to support vulnerable families, for example, improving the situation of single-parent families. So, what is your opinion about the Hungarian family policy?
Well, I think it's worth saying that the EU itself, and you talked about the European level, has refused to take a view on this. Some countries in Europe, including and not exclusively Hungary, are prepared to talk about the subject. Even, for example, President Macron is prepared to talk about it. So it's not a right or a left issue. It should go across the political spectrum. The EU says it's not going to take a view, and I think that's disappointing because this is really a pan-European problem. The population of the EU would be declining without mass immigration, and there are more deaths than births in the EU every year. So many countries in the EU have got very serious demographic problems. I don't believe you'll ever have a dynamic, creative, and successful Europe without turning around this population decline. So I'm disappointed that the EU is unprepared to have anything to say on the subject. I congratulate the Hungarians for having a government that actually takes it seriously, and I think Hungary is a model for a government that takes it seriously and is doing things about it, investing heavily in it, because it realizes that however much it costs to support families today, if you don't have families, if you don't have children, there will be no economy at all tomorrow. And this is something which I think the finance ministries of many countries should understand, that we need to have an economy in the future. We're going to have children today. In terms of the specific policies of the Hungarian government, I think they are being experimental. They're trying different things. I think that's very important. And they have a rhetoric, they have a language of talking about the importance of this subject, which itself is very helpful. We know that the fertility rate in Hungary has increased since 20, 30 years ago. The increase has been modest. There's been a little bit of a retreat in the last year or two, probably to do with COVID and the economic problems around the war in Ukraine. But we have to see this as a long-term campaign. We have to see this as a long-term process. And every year we have to keep working at it. And I think the other thing is that it will never really work unless the culture changes. We need a culture among young people that starting families, having relationships, committing and bringing up children is the most exciting, wonderful thing you can do. The government policies, monetary policies, fiscal policies, incentives, taxations and benefits and loans are really important, but the government needs to be pushing at an open door and not a closed door. Whether that door is open or closed depends on the culture. Now, the government can to some extent affect culture. It can promote young families, the idea of young families. There's a publicity, and I don't want to call it propaganda, but there is the state is very happy in Britain, for example, to say that we must all accept multiculturalism, we must all accept gay marriage. There are a whole set of a range of things where the government has been ahead, if you like, of the public opinion. The end of the death penalty in the 1960s was very unpopular. The government said we've got to persuade the population to that. So the idea of the government persuading the population to do what it believes is the right thing and in favor of the long-term health of society is nothing new. It's not revolutionary. It's not sinister. The government just has to understand that this really is a big issue and it needs to help the society as a whole, not only with taxation of benefits policies, but also changing the mindset of people so that having children and having them at a relatively early age and having 2 or 3 as a norm, some people having 4 or more, some people will choose to have this. It's not about forcing people, but it is about creating the environment and the context in which people, whatever the policies of government are in terms of tax and benefits, people will choose and want to have more children.
Mr. Morland, thank you for your thought-provoking answers and have a nice day, everyone.